Hey programmers, what is going on? I'm the Savage Coder and welcome to episode 28. In this episode, we are going to take our existing MVC code to log in and we're going to port that over to React. And in the process, we're going to run into a problem with CORS. So I wanted to kind of go over that and how it works and what we can do about satisfying the CORS requirements so that our React app can talk to our API. So we'll start with just that and then we'll move on from there. So without further ado, okay, so if we're watching this live when this video is released, Happy New Year, if you so celebrate on this calendar. I have taken some time and put it aside for the new year to be a little more active with this YouTube channel. I know things got a little slow at the end of the year. That is just going to happen. But we're going to see if I can maybe get more than one video out a week, at least in January, to get started. So a little housekeeping there. And that is really all I've got to say about that. So let's jump into code and take a look at. So just a quick note, they are cutting grass in one of the neighbors' yards outside, so hopefully that noise doesn't make it through. Usually this mic's pretty good at isolating me, but if you hear a hum back there, it's not faulty equipment, it's grass getting cut. So let's check out what we have for our login code in our MVC app. If we open that up, we can check out in our views user management index. We made this our login page, and it's just a simple text box for email and password and a button to log you in. All the styles are here on the page because we just lifted this off of a public website for as an example of how to do a login, and it just works great for us. So we'll copy these styles into React, and we'll pretty much copy the layout of the login box as well. The only things that aren't going to work are these MVC helpers, HTML begin form, which becomes rendered as a form anyway, a form tag. So we can just use the form tag when we do that in React. And then the text boxes, we already know how to do inputs in React for text boxes, so we'll just convert the HTML helper here for the actual HTML tag. So let's start off by giving our React application a place for this code to live, like a login view. So if we go into our React code and we go under views, I'm going to add another folder here for login. So we'll just do new folder, login, and then we'll add two files in there, the same as the others, which are login.tsx for the actual views layout and code. And then we'll do another file called login.css. I'm getting an error about an ESLint problem, probably because I need to do an npm install. I had, while we work on this page, I'm just going to go down into the terminal and npm install and let that run in the back while we keep going. So we've got our CSS and our login TSX. So let's go to the CSS file and let's go back to our styles here, and I'm just going to copy all of these classes, these CSS classes, between the style and end style tag. I'm just going to copy those. I'm going to paste them right in because CSS is CSS. So everything in here is fine, other than some formatting, but we're going to leave that for now. And then the rest of this div is really the layout for the page, but we do need a little bit of extra set up in our TSX to get it ready to be an actual React view. And so I'm just going to do our TSRFC, and I'm going to fix this import. Doesn't need React anymore. And for now, we don't need props, so I'm going to get rid of those. We can add back in what we need when we need it. And so here's our function login, and it returns a div. Well, we want it to return what we had from our MVC view. So first thing we know we need to change is we cannot use the word class here, as we discussed in another episode. Those all need to change to class name in React. So I'm just going to do a Control F and find class equal and change that with class capital N name equal and replace all. So that's one thing I want to change. The other thing I want to change is change all of my double quotes to single quotes. And that's just personal preference there. Okay, next thing we need to do is we need to get rid of all of this MVC code. I don't want to even look at errors until I have everything fixed up here. So I'm going to turn this begin form tag into just a form tag. And so my form is going to go between form and class form. We're not going to be using the controllers and actions from MVC because we're not in MVC. We can use the form method post. So if you want, we can put method equals post. And we can do a form action, which is where this post is going to go, right? When we fill out our form and we click our submit button to log in, it's going to take that data and send it to somewhere, right, to be processed to log in the user. So this is the location where that exists. So let's just make up a slash for now, and we'll figure out what we want to do with that after. Okay, now that we've got that settled, we can get rid of this form tag. And we really want to take everything between these curly braces. We don't need the braces themselves, but everything in between them will go inside this form tag. And that's just kind of replacing the MVC. So I'll get rid of the curly braces. I will cut that code and move that into my form tag. There's an href in here. We don't have that implemented anywhere. Basically what we're saying here is if you need an account, sign up and click here. But in our React project, we don't have a page yet to send them to for sign up. So we're still working on the login. All right, so I'm going to save that. Okay, so that takes care of our form. And now the next thing we want to do is get rid of this HTML text box 4. And for that, we're just going to create an input. The GitHub Copilot code is suggesting that I put in the rest of this, which actually is correct. So I'm just going to hit tab, and I'm going to, why is it jumping like that? There we go. Let's make this a little smaller. So that's good. I can now get rid of this HTML text box 4. And same thing with this password. And of course it got that one right as well. Okay, so it looks like everything here is correct except whatever this thing is complaining about. That is bizarre. Let's restart that. Okay, I don't know what all of those red lines were. I restarted my VS Code and it is now working properly. So it is showing me that my HR, my horizontal rule, is missing a self-closing tag. But now it seems like it's happy with everything. Okay, so now we're good. So the only thing left to do is to set up some routing so that we can actually go to this page in a URL. So I'm going to npm start. And so you can see that I've got my main page here, but even if I go to /login, it doesn't know what login is. So all we see is the header and the footer, but there's no page loading between the header and the footer. So that's what we're going to do now. If we go into our app.tsx, this is where all of our router information is. And the menu that we have at the top here, products privacy, when we click the word, it routes to that page, right? Privacy products is the default, and then privacy would go to /privacy. So we want to add one here that says login to get to our login. So I'm just going to copy this li to /li, and we are going to put the word login inside this link. And link is from the React Router library. You can go back a couple episodes and see how we added in link and React Router DOM to get this working. And everything else here is almost okay except for this to. The to is where it actually goes. What route should it link to? So we know that we want it to be /login. So when I click the text login, it goes to login. Well, right now, there is no route set up for login. So if I save here, it will add the word login here. And when I click it, it'll go to localhost 3000/login. But notice there's no page loading because the router doesn't know when I see this URL, which React component should I load. So we have to tell it that, and if we go down, here is our list of routes. So we really want to just add a route, and the path is going to be login, and the element is going to be login. So if we click on our login here and we add login from our views login, all that did was that added this line at the top. So we're importing the view that we want to load, the component, right? This login TSX is what we're loading from views login, and then we're using that login element as our component for that path. So when you see this path, load this component. And so if I save that, you can see that we already are starting to load our login page. Well, I can see immediately that although we pasted our styles into login.css, we never imported login CSS into our TSX file. So we have all of our React code, but it has no way to see outside of its own file. So let's go into our TSX, and at the top, we're just going to import the CSS so that all these CSS things work. So we're going to import login.css. That just says look in login CSS for any CSS files. So if I save that, now our styles apply and we have a nice looking login screen. So problem one solved. We have our view. Now what we need to do is we need to put in some code so that we can call out to our API. So we're going to go into our login, and the first thing we need to do is we need to be able to capture the email, capture the password, and do something when we click the button. So we need to capture the state of these two text boxes so that when someone types in an email or a password, we have those in variables that we can work with. And so we're going to go inside the login function and we're going to set up two state variables, and we're going to do those as constants. And the first one is going to be called email, and I'll let the Copilot complete things for me, even though it's not 100% right. We'll fix that in a second. What I want to do is I want to bring in use state into my imports so that I can use it, and I don't need this React dot. I'm just going to call use state directly. So what does this say? What it says is we're going to create a state variable, just a bucket to hold something, and that variable is called email. It is a constant. It does not change. The default value is whatever's inside these parens. So email will start off with quote, quote. That's perfect because when we start our app, we don't want anything in the email text box. Same thing with our password. We have a constant called password, and it is hooked to a state bucket. This is a React hook called useState that allows us to do this. The other thing that useState gives us is a method or a function that we can call to mutate this constant. How do you mutate a constant? You really can't, right? It kind of, mutations and constants are kind of opposites. So what we're really saying is if I need to change the value of this email, I'm going to call this setEmail method, this function setEmail, and it's going to let React know that this function login needs to be called again so that it can re-render with the new value that's inside email. So calling this causes a full re-render of our login component, and email will be updated in that new render to be a constant with the current email characters in it. So React will take care of multiple renders. So it will figure out the best way to re-render this component so that only minimal updates need to go on and happen in the screen. Let's go ahead and use our email and our password, figuring that those are the values that are going to show up in our text box. So I'm just going to kind of format this input and move each one of these attributes or properties to their own line. And then I'm going to add one called value, and I'm going to make it equal to the email variable here for our state. So what goes in this input text box is whatever's in email. I'm going to do the same thing to the input for password. Okay, so yeah, I'm using Google Copilot instead of typing it just to be a little faster, but the idea is that whatever's in password will become the value of this text box. And now we have to worry about when someone types in the text box. So what we really want to say is something like onChange, the onChange event of the text box, we want to call setEmail to change the email value to whatever the value is that is changed. So if I type the letter R, e.target is this input. So it'll look at the input in HTML on the page, and it'll grab the value out of that input, which is the changed value, right? Because it's coming from this event e.target.value, not email.value. So it's just saying when I type a letter, that's going to generate an event in this variable, and I can look inside the properties of that event to grab the current value of whatever was typed, and I'm going to replace this setEmail is going to replace the value of email, which will update the value here. That's what's happening. And so same thing here. I just onChange and call setPassword, and that will change the value of password. So if we now type in here, it lets us type, and it's actually updating the state. If we inspect, you can see in our hooks, we have the state of whatever it is we're typing. Right? The state is updating. And if you don't have this, you can download, this is the React Chrome tools, the React developer tools. So just go to the Chrome store and you can install it into yours. And so when you right click and go to inspect, you'll have this, all these tabs. One of them will be components and the other one is a profiler. But in components, you can kind of look into the tree of what's being rendered. There's our links at the top, and you can always look at your current state in here. So it's kind of handy to make sure that everything is hooked up. Cool, cool. The next thing we want to do is get the submit button working. And there's a couple ways to actually do this. We can put an on-click event in our submit, and in that method, we could grab our two variables and call out to our API. That would definitely work. The reason I'm not going to do it that way is because down the road, we're going to add some validation. And the validation package that I like works on the form itself. So all of the validation will prevent the form from submitting, or it will work alongside with the form tag and the input elements. And so if I put it in here, it's kind of bypassing the submit. So I want to use the built-in submit logic, which will just submit the form to this action. But I don't want it to reroute to slash. That's not what I want. I want just when I click my submit button, it just calls a method. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a method, and we're going to cancel the default action of go here. So in this form tag, I'm gonna put an on submit saying, hey, when the user clicks submit, I want to call my own method, and we'll just call it login user. And that doesn't exist yet. That's why it's underlined. So let's go above our return here, and let's create a login user, and we know it's going to be async because it's going to make a call out to our API. And what Copilot is suggesting is actually what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and everything except this React dot, because I didn't import React at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that, and I'm just going to remove React. And I'm going to have to add form event to my import. Right there. So that just added form event to my import. And I'm going to rename this event. I like that better than E, just personal taste. And so what I'm saying here is on submit, login user. And then I'm passing in the event, and the event gives me the ability to do an event dot prevent default. I don't need a console.log, so I'm not going to do that one. But so the event.prevent default says, hey, I know this is a form event that is being passed in here, but prevent default is going to stop it from redirecting me to slash. I don't want the action to do anything. Let me worry about the implementation of this submit event. So now that I've canceled it out, all I've got to do is make a call out to our API. So just making sure that our package has Axios. If yours doesn't, do an npm install Axios in the terminal. I already have mine. And so I'm just gonna type that the result is gonna equal await Axios.post, because we want to do a post. And the way I know we want to do a post, if we look at, let me open our API. And if we look at authentication and login, so it's not actually login. What we're doing is we're going to request a token. So in the UI, we're calling it a login, but really it's to get a token is part of the login. But when we call API token, it's a post, and it's going to take in this token request, which has to be email and password, which is exactly what we have in React. So we just have to send this over as an object into into request token as a token request, and that will authenticate and get us our token. So we're going to need this API token later. So let's go back here, and so let's go and give post the URL that we need, which is https localhost, and mine is 44328, and API token. Your URL will be different than this one, basically by the port that's being picked, Possibly. So if you need to know your port, just go over to your API code and just run it. And then you can steal the port from the URL of the browser that pops up. And if you don't want to do it that way, you can also go into Properties Launch Settings, and you can grab it from this 44328. If you're starting IIS, then you can grab the IIS settings there. Okay? And we are SSL, not application URL. So that's the port you would need. Okay. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to pass this post our values. So I'm going to do comma, and then we want to pass it an object. And the object that we're going to pass it is email and password. So it's a JSON object, email. Value is going to be this email state value, and password, whose value is going to be password. So the email and password on the left here has to match. Oops. It has to match in this token request. It has to match this email and password. You don't have to capitalize the properties, because C# will do that for you. And so now, if this is successful, right, we do a post to this API token passing an email and password, we can say if you get a result, and yep, that'll work for me. We're going to comment out this local storage for now. We'll probably use that after, though. And I'm just going to do a console.dir result.data.token. And what that's going to give me is this result is going to have a .data, and that's where the result of our post is stored, because result also has things like the headers and all that stuff. So, but the payload, the data that comes back from your API call, is always going to be in .data. So I just say, hey, if we have a result and data has something in it, then there should be a token property in there, because that's what our API returns. If we look at what we're returning, it's a token response, and a token response just has one property called token. And so we can just grab that token from the result here. I think that's it. So let's go ahead and try this out. So I'm just going to refresh to make sure I'm connected here. I'm going to inspect, and I'm just going to hit the network and sources. And all right, we'll stay on console. And these are minor errors that, well, they're warnings. These are minor warnings. And so we'll fix that stuff after. All right, but first what I want to do is savage.coder at sharklasers.com, and then our password 123 is our password. Let me grab that from here just to make sure I got it right. Okay, and then I'm going to hit login, and we got an error, connection refused. Why? Because it's posting to localhost 44328. Oh, let's make sure we're running. We are not running. So that would be a good reason for a protocol error. It can't talk to our API. So once our Swagger loads, let's go try this again. I'm going to just clear this out and click login. Okay, this is what I was looking for. All right, so our code actually is fine. The reason that we're running into a problem here is because of something called CORS, C-O-R-S. And this is a cross-site security mechanism that was implemented to help cut down on forgeries and to help protect and secure the communication of an application and its API. So what it means is, if you read it, it kind of tells you what's going on. It's saying your access to your request at API token on localhost 44328 from the origin localhost 3000 has been blocked by CORS. So what that means is my request to get a token is coming from this browser, which is on localhost 3000. And my API is denying that request because it's saying, hey, by default, all requests have to come from where I live on localhost 44328. And if we move this to some other host with real domain names here, if this was, api.mysite.com and it didn't even have a port, and this was myapp.com, they still would not match. The .coms would match, but the api.mysite doesn't match my app. So when those don't match, your API is going to deny that request. So two things happen. First, it describes here, response to pre-flight request doesn't pass access control check. No access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. Well, that's a mouthful. So let's talk about what really that means. If we go to the network tab, and if I shrink this stuff down, if I can find it, come on. Where is my... Well, let me do something. Oops. Let me do something real quick here. Okay, well, I'm going to clear this out, and I'm going to click login again. So on the network tab here, you can see that our token endpoint was called twice. Well, that's kind of weird, right? I only clicked login once. Why is it calling the API twice? The reason is because of a CORS check. Even though they're listed in this order, this second one actually happened first. They just happen so fast that sometimes they log out of order here. But if you look, this called token, API token, with a pre-flight. Pre-flight meaning, hey, before I make the actual token call, I want to make sure everything is legit. So if we look at the type of request, even though we sent a post, it requested something called options. And when the API sees options, it says, hey, I need to know if I'm able to pass your pre-flight check. So I'm going to send you in my request headers, right? This is everything I'm sending with my login request. So with this options call, I'm going to send you my origin. This is where I'm calling from. And this is all built into the browser. And because all of this stuff is done at the browser level, and all the major browsers support this, but because this is done at the browser level, things like Postman will actually work. If you test this out in Postman, the API is fine. But the browsers put in more security. So basically, we sent this origin to the API. The API said, no, that's not on my list of allowed origins. And so it sent back a status code 405 of, no, this is not happening. And so then immediately this guy fails because it didn't get back the right header. So when the options call is completed, if it wasn't a 405, we'd get back a header saying, yes, you're good to go. Your cross-origin check is good. In this case, we're getting a 405, so this is expected to fail, which it does. All right, so how do we fix all this? Well, we know from our error that the origin is being blocked by the API. So if we could fix this in the React code on the React side, then what good would it be as security? Anybody that writes code can just say, yeah, I'm good, allow me. So the responsibility falls on the API to allow only certain applications or certain URLs or certain origins to be allowed to access the API. And that's how the API can kind of lock down and say, hey, I only accept requests from these guys. That's who I expect to hear from. Anybody else can't call me. And so to fix that, we're going to go into our API code. I'm going to stop this. And all of our changes go in one place, in the startup. All right, so in our startup, I'm going to do a Control RG to clean up those usings. But in our startup, we're going to go to the very first line inside configure services. We want to handle CORS right off the bat at the top, and these do run in the order that they're in this file. So we don't want to start setting things up if the call's not even allowed. So we're going to use this services collection to set up CORS. So we're going to add CORS. And CORS needs some configuration because we need to be able to tell it which origins are allowed. So we're going to actually use a method and the argument that our function is going to be passed is this options. And so in options, we can do something called add policy. And adding a policy just sets up what's allowed and what's not. And then later when we say, hey, turn on CORS, we can tell it, use this policy that we defined above. So our policy needs a name. So I'm just going to add a new private const. Well, we'll call it allowed origins. And I'll just make that equal to allowed origins. And it doesn't matter what you name this. This is just strictly a name for the policy we're about to define. So the first thing we do is we give it the variable, the constant that we just, and that's just to avoid having quote here, you know, with a name hard coded. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to define our policy. I'm going to call this, that's fine. Okay, so now we're going to do policy dot with origins, and this with origins will accept, if you look at the documentation, it will accept a string array of origins. So you can have multiple origins in here. So basically whatever I would put inside these quotes would be an allowed origin. Well, we know from our error back in our browser, we need to allow HTTP localhost 3000. I'm going to copy that address and I'm going to put it in there. Now I only have one for now. And ultimately what we want to do is we want to add this to some sort of configuration so that it knows which origins are allowed in which environment. So when we're running this in dev, everything's going to be running localhost 3000. But maybe when it's ready for test and it goes to a QA server, that would have a different domain origin here, and so we would have that in a configuration that when we deploy this to QA, it would only allow applications in QA to get to this API. So we're still going to get an error with this that we'll talk about in a minute, but I don't want to just put in code without, you know, kind of having a reason, you know, for doing what I'm doing. So now if we scroll down and we go into our configure, we can tell this app.use CORS. Oops, app.use use CORS. And we're just going to give it the allowed origins. And that's why I made it a constant, so that we didn't have to put quote allowed origins quote and then maybe misspell it from up top, since we're going to reuse that. Quoted things like this are called magic strings, and I generally stay away from them. This was generated, so I just left it. But anyway, so use CORS and use the policy allowed origins. And if we look back up here, our policy called allowed origins says, yeah, allow localhost 3000. So now if we run it and we go back to our React code and clear that. I'm not going to change any code. I'm not going to refresh the page. I'm just going to clear that and clear the network. And we click this, you would expect that, yeah, hey, that should work. Well, it didn't. We got another CORS error. When you see these kinds of errors, the answer is usually in the error message itself. Although this looks like the same error we saw a little bit ago, if we read it, hey, access to API token from this origin has been blocked by CORS policy. That is the same, right? So you're like, well, what are you talking about? I just added localhost 3000 to the allowed origins to call this API. If you keep reading, though, it says request header field content type is not allowed by the access control allow headers in pre-flight response. So what it's really saying here is you sent a header called content type and you sent it in the pre-flight. And so by default, I don't allow that. So for us, the easiest way to solve this thing is just to go in and say, you know what, for this policy, I'm going to allow any header. And that way it says, you know what, even in pre-flight, if you send me extra headers, I'll allow them. And it's not going to do anything with them. It's just going to kind of, it's allowing you to really focus in on your security model. So if you wanted to, you could go and remove that header from being sent. But, you know, Axios is doing that by default. And so rather than get tied up in there, I think for our application, this will do fine. So I do have to start that again, because this configure services only runs when our API starts up. And so now if I click login, we get our token back. So everything's working perfectly now. If we look at our network tab, this token was probably from earlier. So let's clear that and run it again. Yeah. So you have your pre-flight. This time came back as a 204, not that 405. And then the actual API call brought back a 200, and the request had our payload in it, and the response had our token object in it. So that is perfect, and that is also a really good stopping point. So today what we learned is how to move more pages from MVC into React. Then we set up an Axios call to make our API round trip to get a token, and then we learned about CORS and why things get blocked at the API level by default and what we can do about it to allow those calls from trusted applications. So the one really cool thing about this is that we're taking our API and we're allowing MVC to use it, and we're now allowing React to use it. And we could add mobile devices, like any kind of application or anything you can think of, Raspberry Pi IoT devices, whatever you want, can ultimately call this API and use our site, right? Use our backend to run a front end on any platform. So any platform that allows REST calls anyway. So that's it for today. I hope that was good stuff. If you found this helpful at all, please subscribe and help me help you, or something like that. And let me know if you have any questions or problems. I am always here to help and eager. You can get me on social media in the links in the description. You also can comment on these videos, and I usually get back within a couple of days to those. And if there's anything else you would like me to cover, let me know. I'm into all of this. And after this, the next episode is going to be about getting this token and storing it in React, and then making an authenticated call to our API to actually get the products back so that we can display them in React the same way we did in MVC. All right, folks, thanks for joining, and I will see you online.